Okay. All right, the pursuit of perfection. Before my sophomore year of high school, I had just received the information that I made it into the Advanced Algebra 2 class. And I had a test on the first day of class, and it covered the entire review section of my book. And so, yeah, I studied for it for this duration of the summer, and I prepared myself, and I felt ready. And when I took it, I ended up doing pretty well. I got a 48% on it, which is sadly not very good. But the average was a 40%, and so I was trying to think positive and say, hey, maybe that was a good grade. So in that moment, I truly believed that I got a good grade on my test. That grade was just one step closer to that perfection that I'd always tried to attain. And now, if I get a 48% on a test today, I think I'd die. I'd be so upset. But in that moment, there was a change in my definition of perfection. Now, maybe someone got a 56 on the same test and was so upset because they could only think about how much they missed, and they were all unhappy. So it begs the question, is perfection an unchanging standard? And I'm here to tell you that it is not. That our definition of perfection happens in the moment, and that what different scenarios we go through in life change our individual standards. So where do we get these standards of perfection? Well, through my research, I have come to discover that we get these standards from three sources. The first is our biology, our makeup, our DNA, how we have been created, how our brain is wired. We attribute certain things to perfection because it helps us evolve. Next, society. That there are social pressures in this world that have caused us to believe that some things are perfect over other things. And finally, faith and tradition. That tradition that has been passed down from generation to generation has changed what we believe is perfect in our society. So let's start with biology. I chose this picture because I think it depicts a situation very similar to what we're talking about today. This idea that all of our minds, our individual makeups, all of us, we are all these plants, but we all came from an individual seed. And that this seed, from that, we grew as different people to be the diverse characters that we see around us today. So, in this case, the seed is our instinct, because we all start out with certain instincts. So, the instinct we're going to be talking about is empathy. We are instinctually wired to sustain life because we are a social species as humans. We accomplish the greatest feats through teamwork. History has proven that many times. So, when we're walking down the street and we see someone in need, we have this desire to help them. And whether or not we choose to act on that, the very desire itself proves that we are all instinctually built with this empathy. So perhaps we attribute acts of empathy to perfection. Maybe we're enthralled with stories that have like sacrificial love in it because we see the perfection of empathy itself in that. Or maybe your favorite movie, a movie you consider perfect, are the ones with the most empathetic characters, the ones that you can relate with the most. Another example of this biology would be like, have any of you guys ever seen one of those survival shows where they go out into the wilderness and they're starving to death because they're so cut off from civilization? But then they see like a caterpillar or a maggot or something like that, and they're like, oh my gosh, that's just what I need right now. And then you get something like this. Well, this is our psychology telling us that something that was previously imperfect is now perfect because it satisfies the needs of that situation. All right, next, society. So I'm an American. I grew up in a very materialistic and consumerist world, and I sadly value the materials in my life much more than I probably should. So whenever I eat, I'll always use a napkin. I only hesitantly share things. I don't wear clothes I don't like. I'm a wreck without my phone. I mean, the list goes on. But then let's look at this other nation. This is the tribe, the Tanins, and they live in the country of Vanuatu, which is east of Australia, and they are one of the oldest tribes in the world. And they are very poor because they don't have much materials in their world. But they share what little they have, and they are a happy community. So the Tanins continue to prove that consumerism isn't the root of all happiness. Now, I would have trouble imagining a perfect reality where all the materials in my life just disappeared. But perhaps it wouldn't be as hard for the Tanins to give up what little they have. So we can see here how society has changed our definition of perfection. Switching gears here. In North Korea, as Maya Salam and Matthew Haag of the Washington Post said, their independent thought is bred out, and propaganda glorifying the state is plentiful. So this watertight dictatorship we have here, perhaps it is hard for some people to find the chance to be educated on the outside world. And before they can say whether the country they live in is truly perfect, like the propaganda says, they might not even have the opportunity to compare that to another culture or another nation. So we see that this individual culture, the culture of this nation, has changed these people's standards of perfection, or set them rather. And last, faith and tradition. I group these because faith and tradition depend pretty heavily on each other in society. You see countries making laws that support their majority religion, and then you see religion kind of supporting the country as well, and they're kind of intertwined in our world. So we're going to start with religion. All religion has a sense of order and chaos, and the order is always depicted as something that's perfect and something to strive for, and the chaos is always falling short of that perfection. And each religious person tries to model the perfection that is outlined in their doctrine. So here's one example of this perfection. This comes from the Christian Bible in Romans 12:2. It says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." So this tells the early disciples of Christianity that they are to follow God's will because they define God's will as perfect and good and acceptable. We see here how much easier it is to call perfection objective when we can assign it to a deity or deities, because we understand that in their doctrine that the world has been created from these deities or deity. So through faith, religious people will try to model this objective perfection that is outlined in their doctrine. And then tradition. So I grew up in the Western world, and I know a very Western Christmas. I know a Christmas that has Christmas trees and Christmas songs, and where we come together as a family and exchange gifts. And it's hard for me to imagine a perfect Christmas in which none of these things were happening. So you can already see how tradition has changed my definition of perfection that is different from other people's definition of a perfect Christmas who have not grown up in the Western world. Or here's another example. I grew up in an Italian family, and I've been taught to appreciate authenticity of Italian foods. So perhaps I would walk into a Mexican restaurant and maybe it's not authentic, but that wouldn't bother me as much if I went to as if I went to an Italian restaurant and it wasn't authentic. And that's because I have been trained and I've been taught through tradition about this authenticity and how important it is. So we see that tradition has changed my definition of perfection. All right, so what's the point about learning all these standards? Well, I found that our definition of perfection is a key point in defining who we are as a person. So before I unravel this, I want to see how the pros define perfection. So I put this definition of perfection from Oxford Dictionary. It says, perfection is the condition, state, or quality of being free or as free as possible from all flaws or defects. So we are given this definition, which is an absolute, which means that it's either perfect or it's not perfect, that it has to be flawless. But is that really physically possible? Is there anything in this world that it hasn't been adulterated by something else? Is there anywhere in this universe that has escaped the grasp of gravity? Can we say that a diamond is 100% free of any other substance within it? And it's hard to say this definition with certainty. Now, people who are perfectionists define perfection the same way that Oxford does, which makes sense. But they hold themselves to these inhuman standards, and when they inevitably fail, they fall into disappointment and it becomes unhealthy. So we have to ask ourselves, is perfection realistic? Ralph Waldo Emerson stated in his compilation Education that accuracy is essential to beauty. But I disagree. We cannot create something flawless. I mean, the materials we are given in this world are inherently flawed. So we set ourselves up for failure. So how can we fix this? Well, we as a community need to redefine perfection. Good parents shouldn't expect their kids to be flawless. It's unreasonable. So why should they raise perfectionists? I believe that good parents don't raise perfectionists, but raise hard workers. Perfectionists hit a wall and fall down, but hard workers get back up and keep plowing through life. My sophomore year, I wasn't excited that I failed my test. I was excited because I did my best, and because of that, I had hope for the future. So now perfection isn't the absence of flaw. Perfection is working hard, and it's attainable by anyone, no matter where you were born, how old you are, or what position you're in life. You can always strive to do your best. So this new definition, it encourages us to keep working. So if we can learn to define perfection as not the destination, but the journey itself, we will find motivation, success, and contentment. Thank you. All right, and we're off to our last presentation with our very own Jeff Tang, who sells himself short. He has done so much for this club. He has done all the organization, and we're really grateful for you, Jeff. So thank you so much for just being a part of this and making this happen. Jeff
Tang. Thank you, Matthew. Well, all the other speeches were so good.